Welcome to this special edition of the TDI podcast series, Suits and Boots, brought to you as part of TDI's strategic partnership with Mining Indaba 2025. I'm Ashton Carter, CEO at TDI, and I'm joined today by two representatives from different parts of the mining industry who will be speaking at this year's Mining Indaba event. Over the course of this series of special edition podcasts, we've been discussing the key themes of this year's Indaba. Today's topic is giving a voice to future generations, and we'll be talking about how the next generation of miners can be better integrated into an evolving mining industry and how new approaches and opinions can be embraced to help build a stronger and more resilient mining sector in Africa. I'm delighted to be joined today by Zenzi Awases. Zenzi is a skilled geologist with nearly 2 decades of experience. She's a passionate advocate for women's empowerment in mining. Through her company, Empower Mine Consulting Services, she extends her expertise beyond her technical skills. Co-founding the Women in Mining Association in Namibia and serving as president of the Association of Women in Mining in Africa, her dedication extends far beyond her own accomplishments. I'm also joined today by Linda Omara Koledade. Linda is a Ugandan national based and raised in South Africa who is passionate about development in the African continent. She has more than 14 years of experience in investment banking and is currently working in development finance, funding equity and debt in the mining and metal sector across Africa. Linda is also a startup mentor at Savant Venture Fund, which invests in African hardware and deep technology companies that are underpinned by science and engineering innovation. And she is the founder and CEO of Mustard Seed, a platform that empowers entrepreneurs and professionals. Welcome, Zenzi and Linda. You've both started and continue to drive wonderful organizations, Women in Mining Association, Mustard Seed, and Empower Mine, but you've trained and are successful in, shall we say, more traditional professional career paths, geology, investment banking, and development finance. But you've chosen to put some of your considerable energy and talents into these organizations serving women, youth, and entrepreneurs. Why? Linda.
Okay, thank you, Assheton, for that question. I get it all the time, and it's quite interesting to always just elaborate on it. So firstly, as you mentioned, obviously my career has been within investment banking, structuring debt and equity, and primarily we fund corporates and entrepreneurs. That's what I've done the bulk of my career, though it's sector specific. And what I found over the years is that in structuring and arranging funding for corporates, startups and entrepreneurs that are coming up the growth curve, we find that they're generally not able to access funding. There are information gaps. There's information asymmetry when we compare the startup entrepreneurs to seasoned or established corporates. So my interest really came out of my day job where I'm working with these really established, well-run corporates. And on the side, I have individuals, family, friends, acquaintances, or just people I met through networking who want to engage and find out how they too can participate better in some of these sectors, mining being one of them, and how they can access funding. And the access to funding is, in my opinion, from an entrepreneurial perspective, difficult because of the information asymmetry. So Mustard Seed was founded to really engage entrepreneurs around financial well-being, empower them, teach them, train them, and also connect them to leading industry trailblazers. And secondly, also just teach entrepreneurs about entrepreneurship itself. Because again, what I found in the space that I'm at, we're not able to invest and support entrepreneurs so well because a huge number of entrepreneurs are fantastic at their technical expertise, but perhaps not always well-trained as far as leadership is concerned, about financial management, raising capital, and a whole range of topics that make an entrepreneur successful. So Mustard Seed was founded to literally supplement, support, empower, and also create a platform for young people to network, to find mentors, to find coaches, to find sponsors, and a platform where we can learn from one another. So it is an extension of my career, if I may put it that way. Thank you.
And Zenzi, Women in Mining in Africa. Tell us a little bit about the origins of that.
I'll give a bit of a background. I started, before I joined the continental body, I co-founded the Women Mining Association of Namibia. And really, it was out of pure frustration. After about 10 years being in the industry, I had a bit of a aha moment where I sat back and I'm realizing, but hey, the guys who are my managers are actually the same people who I went to a university with. Basically, it was when I realized that as much as we are part of the mining industry, women are really excluded. And I don't know why it only hit me 10 years in my career. And then I think it was when I was at business school in Stellenbosch, when I started noticing, topics such as inclusion and diversity and whatever. And I had actually planned to resign the year when I come back from business school. But instead I co-founded the Women Mining Association with the aim. It was when I realized that I'm not the only woman in mining who's feeling frustrated with career stagnation. We were being overlooked for promotions, etc. And when we sat around a table, we realized that the reasons that they give us are things such as, you're not ready. And that's when I said, what, how do you mean we're not ready when the same person I studied with is on the same career trajectory as I am? So how come he's ready and I'm not ready? So that was the Namibian one. And then I realized, but Namibia is a little bit behind, because I was then introduced to the African Women in Mining Association. And that's when I was exposed to, there are thousands of women out there. And then it rolled over globally to the International Women in Mining, WOM UK, etc., when there's a whole community of women in mining whose voice is just not being heard. So there's that famous saying that says diversity brings us to the table, inclusion allows us to dance, or something like that. So there were many of us, and that's how it got involved. And since then, really, it's been quite a rock and roll movement. We've seen so much change across the industry just by advocacy, and then because I later on learned that it's not that they don't want to include you. It's actually a matter of they don't understand the gender dynamics when it comes to these careers. So yeah, that's basically why I do what I do and why I love doing what I do.
Thanks so much. Linda, I wonder if we could return to entrepreneurship before we talk again about women in mining. To me, I've always found entrepreneurs very inspiring, and perhaps that's because I've started 4 or 5 companies myself. But it seems to me now that learning about entrepreneurialism is even more important, as there are so many changes and the pace of changes accelerates with artificial intelligence and other technologies as well. What are the opportunities for young people wanting to put their energy and careers into starting enterprises in mining and metals, and perhaps even kind of more broadly than that? Mining isn't an industry which has been known for innovation. Things move quite slowly. What do you see as the opportunities for 60% of the African continent who are under 25?
The topic of entrepreneurship is really close to my heart. I'm quite passionate about it. And perhaps to start to answer the question, let's just look at the backdrop if I look in the South African context. So South Africa's mining industry is the 5th largest globally in terms of GDP. And the sector has a huge opportunity to drive the country's GDP even further. And perhaps even just to quantify that again, roughly $11 billion were contributed just alone to South Africa's GDP, forget the other African countries. So if we look at that backdrop, it's a huge opportunity for young people to participate economically in vibrant areas where GDP growth is quite substantial. So I would say, firstly, from a young person's perspective, mining needs to be considered beyond just extracting the ore. I tend to find a lot of people that I engage with just imagine mining as going underground, extracting ore. There's a huge range or huge plethora of opportunities across the mining and the metals value chain. Support services can be rendered. There's transport and logistics, there's manufacturing, processing, etc. So I think the first step for young people is to recognize the variety and to understand the variety of opportunities across the sector. That's number one. And I think my advice broadly is also from an innovation perspective for young people to identify operational challenges or risks or gaps and essentially look at that as opportunities to the extent that one can become innovative, try troubleshoot, try find solutions. In my opinion, that's an opportunity for young people to come in and innovate apply technology and find opportunities that are for themselves. And this can be through entrepreneurship as well as leadership in a corporate. I am an advocate of both. However, from an entrepreneurship perspective, obviously there's direct equity. So my advice is really to seek out those gaps and to plug in with a solution.
And is the capital there for entrepreneurs? Sometimes I feel that the capital available, especially in mining, is becoming more risk averse. But are you finding that there is pathways to access needed capital, especially for young organizations and new entrepreneurs?
So the question is, it's a great question, because as a banker, I would say, as an investment banker, my answer would be no, because with the way we structure and look and accept and take on risk is very different from a DFI perspective. So I would say definitely in terms of capital, perhaps in the traditional banking setup, it's tricky for startups and up and coming entrepreneurs to access capital. However, from a development finance institute perspective, which is my day job and bread and butter, there's huge opportunity, as well as from a venture capital perspective, angel investor perspective. And part of my work at Mustard Seed is advocating for that, teaching entrepreneurs about those opportunities to access funding. But most importantly, education is important. I receive tons of applications on a daily basis. We receive tons of applications on a daily basis. However, the rejection rate is relatively high because the know-how in terms of how to access a capital is somewhat wanting. There's a gap in the market. And I do think while the capital is there, there's a bit of asymmetry. And perhaps, like I said, established corporates or individuals who have access funding have an upper hand. So there is work for us to be done to be able to really teach, empower, and train entrepreneurs and people looking to enter into entrepreneurship, or even just expand your business, just to learn how to access capital. There's a lot of detail that goes into our work from a funding perspective. And I think if we can bridge that gap between the entrepreneurs or the individuals looking to raise funding and the financiers, the answer would be a big yes. There's definitely opportunity. Yeah.
And Zenzi, in one of my organizations called the Impact Facility, we invest into small businesses around mining developments. And we find that women are some of the best entrepreneurs and custodians of our investment. What progress and what part what role do you see for women in entrepreneurship, especially in the mining sector?
I love this project. I mean, I love this question. I love this podcast and even the theme thereof, because why I'm sitting here literally trying not to jump up and down, because Awima is about to talk about financial inclusion. And we realized, and I think there's a study done by the World Bank and the MasterCard Index about the way we've moved into entrepreneurship, especially in the mining industry. And Linda has answered it spot on. It's a matter of people don't understand how to help the female entrepreneur in mining. It's historic and it's thematic, but it comes down to lack of knowledge, both on the financier as well as, I guess, even Linda just said that, we don't know how to access the funding that's available. So the project that we're about to launch, that we'll be looking at this year, is focusing on just that. How do you access? How do you de-risk a project for the financier and vice versa? So a lot still needs to be done on that. Ash, I think I might have drawn off the question here, but yes, I was getting too excited on that. But you can.
No, it's great to hear that passion. I think one we all share. But more generally, Zenzi, in women and mining. I mean, in one of the series of these podcasts, we were lucky to have the CEO of Ivanhoe, who is a lady, Mana Kote, who's one of the few mining CEOs who is female in the major mining industry. But you started, your opening remarks were about trying to correct the imbalance of the voice of women in mining generally. And I think you said that there had been some progress made. So what progress have you seen? Have we achieved something?
Let's first start on defining the woman in mining. I mean, I love the fact that you spoke to Mana, who comes from a large scale mining perspective, but at with our when we started really delving into what are the needs of the woman in mining, when we say we are the voice of the woman in mining in Africa or in whichever country we are from, the question then becomes, which woman are you speaking to? So we made it a point to define the woman in mining, and so basically just do like a demographic study on our members, and we then realized that there are 4 types of women in mining, right? There's the professional woman, like Moana, those who are in large scale mining. There's the ASM, there's the entrepreneur woman in mining, and then there's the woman in community, the woman affected by mining. And each of these women groups have got different, can I call it challenges? The small big nuances between these 4 types of women, right? Now, while the progress in the large scale mining can be measured tangibly by saying, oh, you know what? So I'll use the example in Namibia, where when we started the movement in 2017, at that point, we were boasting and very celebrating the fact that there are 10% women in leadership. And when you unpack that number, it actually became 1 out of 10 executives in the mining industry of Namibia was a female. Then you realize that was actually in 2009, and 10 years later, that number went up to 2. So I guess you can say there's been an improvement, right? But you cannot measure at this point in time, you cannot measure the progress made in the other 3 women in mining types, which is the small scale miner, additional small scale miner, the woman in community, as well as the entrepreneur. So what needs to be done is to first of all, assist associations like ours to do a proper data collection and an analysis, because that only with data can you actually measure what progress has been done. You cannot just go out there and give a thumbs up figure and say, oh, this is what we've done. But you can definitely see from our member countries, those who have made it from being an advocate to actually going up to, whether it's in the minister or whether it is in a much, much bigger leadership position, that you can see. But I would like to be assisted with data collection and analysis. The other part is to then also invest a whole lot in capacity building and skills development. How do you want a woman who is in ASM, even the one in large scale mining or the entrepreneur, as well as the one in community, stand on an equal standing if you have not given them capacity building? And what else can still be done is to continue advocating for policy change, because you'll be surprised. I just completed a study on ESG in some African countries, and you'll be surprised how there is policy to involve women in mining industry, but the policies are quite archaic. So you need these policies to change to bring these women up into much better positions as well, So there are many things that can be done, and I think the bottom line is to start assisting associations, NGOs who advocate for gender equality in the mining industry. And then only can we talk about the tangible progress that has been done in the mining industry when it comes to gender.
And Linda, you pointed out earlier that when we think about mining, we should think about the whole value chain. And of course, investment is part of the mineral development value chain. In regards to women in investment in mining, have you seen a change there in the role that women play?
As far as investing is concerned, and perhaps if I can and make it more broad, investment banking and even development finance in a technical sector where I work is still predominantly male dominated. It is male dominated, also due to probably the rigorous working hours, the rigorous workload. And this is when we look at the traditional role of a young woman or a woman who's running a household, a mother, a wife, etc. I think given that backdrop, there has also been a bias from a female's perspective, and perhaps even the technical nature of it. I think we need to break the stereotype and there's more work to be done to expose, number one, women, to educate women so that we do not get hindered by the high barrier to entry, if I may call it. Technically, that's from a financing perspective and also from a financing in a technical sector perspective. So there is growth. However, I believe there is much work that still needs to be done. If we look at not only, like I said, just mining, but also the investment aspect of it. And if I'm to elaborate further on that, I do think, to your point, Zenzi, it's so important that women can have platforms where they can meet, engage, and have positive role models that make them feel that, listen here, I can do that too. If Zenzi is out there doing it, I can do that too. I think that will break the gap. But on the whole, there definitely still is, Assheton, there definitely still is a bit of a bias and a gap when it comes to investing broadly. So there's work to be done.
And technology can be a great catalyst and a disruptor. And we are seeing technology. We've had a podcast specifically on technology in the mining industry, sometimes reflecting on the more specific things like having sensors in identifying high-grade ores and reducing waste, for example. But more generally, do we see that technology coming into the mining sector can shift some of these historical norms, if you want? I'll give you one example is that in South America, where I've been working, some of the control centers for mines have been setting up nearer towns, so not out remote at the mine, so they can accommodate women who have to have obligations at home, for example. But do we see that technology could be an opportunity for both women in mining and also the youth in mining? Linda?
Yes, definitely. I do think technology plays a role because it also allows for improving, for example, just the health and safety on the mines. It improves that. And perhaps there's a lot more remote work from an office desk, like you mentioned, that can take place. And those type of factors might make it more palatable and maybe more open for women to participate. However, when it comes to technology, I think in the African perspective, we can't ignore the point of access and affordability of, number one, the internet, number two, the actual technology that is required. And with that particular focus, I think in developing countries, many women are a little bit biased to or unable to access technology. And that is specific to low-income countries. What we find is the cost, at least what I've established, is that the cost of the internet and access to the devices is limited, and it actually forces women, in some instances, when we look at really remote sort of areas, to choose between actually connecting to the internet and doing the day-to-day tasks. So I think work can be done around the access and affordability in the African context, and maybe not necessarily in the urban areas, because it's easier in the urban areas. We can access Wi-Fi, and perhaps there's easier access to technology. But however, in the outskirts, I do think there's work to be done. And then if we talk about women broadly, Assheton, and technology, I also believe, or at least I feel, that from a female perspective, there's also work to be done to improve perceptions around technology, because that on its own, I'm not sure how it is in the UK or in Namibia, but in our environment, that technology aspect on its own is also seen to be a male-dominated sort of environment. So again, I think I'm a big advocate of networking. I'm a big advocate of mentorship, of sponsorship, and just exposing women and young people to the opportunities that are present, to technologies that are available at their disposal. And I do believe that is an opportunity that can allow us to kind of spearhead and actively participate more in the mining sector and technology sector.
And that's a very good point, Linda. It forms part of the capacity building I was referring to earlier. But, for that capacity building to take place, because we have got what is the right word for it? What comes to mind is footprint. We literally have access to women. Okay, in mining. So an association like mine, the Awima, or even mustard seed, these are all small pots that can be used actually to filter through what we want to achieve for technology in mining. Build. I know with WIMAN, which is the Namibian Association of Women in Mining, we actually want to build STEM clubs where we start exposing children from a very young age to technology. The ones who are currently in the mining industry, those who are at large scale mines can already be trained, but at the end of the day, we have a future, and that future is with the young children, and that's to expose this technology to these young children through initiatives such as those being brought forward by NGOs that represent women in mining, and I guess mining in general. But it is more. We need support as these non-for-profits organizations that lead and who are advocating and are actually the bridge between the industry and the community or the people affected by mining. So I just want to add on to that.
I was hoping to hear that your views would be that technology is gender agnostic, and this opened up opportunity for more equality in the workplace or the upcoming workplace. But what you seem to be saying is that apart from the access to the internet, the last mile problem, that women aren't attracted to technology because it's perceived as a male-dominated domain. Is that right? So I guess the corollary question there is, how do we make it more attractive if this is going to be a disruptor?
I always say, with technology in the mining industry, it's kind of twofold, maybe it's very multifaceted. For women to be involved, we've been saying let's get women involved. So we send a lot of many girl child to schools, right? And there they learned about the mining industry. Now we're bringing in technology, and it does not steer away. It shouldn't push away a woman from entering the mining industry through technology. My counter question to that, or rather my argument around why women are not getting involved in that is, again, when you dissect the ones involved in the industry, and then you start going down into which of the fields, professions in mining are predominantly women. The first field that comes to mind is geology. There are more female geologists in the industry. Currently, actually, it's very saturated. Now, how do you infuse technology or AI with geology? Because especially if you're an exploration geologist, right? Because now you'll argue and say you can teach, through machine learning and whatever, but that is one profession that will still require you to go into the field. But I think even when you're bringing in technology, you need to understand what you are bringing in. Which industry, which professions are you trying to affect? Machine learning is supposed to make things easier. There are some mines that are being operated through AI that can be easily done by a woman. That shouldn't be the distractor. But the professions that are affected and that still needs to be investigated. I'm yet to find out how you will lock core in the field with AI, and how will you differentiate between the different lithologies with AI? So this is a question. I don't think it's a gender discussion when it comes to technology, especially in the mining industry, maybe in other industries, but not as straightforward as we think it is. No.
Yeah. And I've just been to a mining exhibition, and was fascinated by the number of different drones that I saw can do a lot of surveying remotely. But yes, I think you're saying we're just at the beginning, and it's hard to envision what the future and what opportunities it will bring. But we need to adapt, and that comes, I think, we need to be ready to adapt, and that, I think, comes to skilling the youth who want to get into mining. I would say not just mining, but as Linda said, the whole value chain. So what skills should we be teaching or give access or enable the youth to learn? And how do we channel it? How do we provide this to the youth in Africa? Linda.
So in terms of skills, I would definitely, we definitely need to, before we go into skills, let me just take a little bit back, Assheton. I think exposure for me is so important. Because if I look back and I think of my choice in career, it's because the spectrum of opportunities that I saw as a young 18-year-old who was about to go into university was as a result of my knowledge, as a result of the role models and the individuals that I saw and my understanding of the profession. And I find that's quite limited when it comes to mining or even mining services or along the value chain like I described. So I think number one, we have to find opportunities, and Zenzi, you mentioned it, from a younger age to really teach young Africans and expose them to what potential opportunities are available out there. And I think once we have that done, it's just like our understanding, if I may put that example of a medical doctor and the different specialities. It's one of the age-old professions that we understand understand quite clearly. We've experienced it, we've seen it, and I think we need more of that in the mining sector so that young people, and also women in particular, can identify and say, listen here, I can be a doctor, a lawyer, or I can be a mining engineer. So I think exposure for me is very important to make sure that individuals from a young age have that option and an avenue to kind of be able to select a career path they want to venture into. And obviously we have university training that's available, but I think to supplement that training specifically from an entrepreneurship perspective, I would definitely say corporate South Africa can come in, incubators, opportunities to support entrepreneurs are so important because that also provides as an engine to educate, to teach, to empower. And I can give you one example, Assheton. So we hosted a tech summit with Mustard Seed towards the latter part of last year. And we had Microsoft as our keynote speaker, and they were supporting the event. And what was quite fascinating was they have a hub called Startup Hub of Microsoft South Africa. And essentially, the speaker spoke quite broadly about the upcoming trends that entrepreneurs and also professionals in the tech sector are to look out for. And the interesting bit that came out of that is that a lot of entrepreneurs had no idea of the hub that provides education, it provides training, it provides funding, and they support. So I do think while we can acquire technical expertise at university or tertiary level, there's also great work to be done beyond that to also just expand and engage individuals about the opportunities across the mining value chain. And Zenzi, feel free to add, since that is your background. Yeah.
I think also access to add to the exposure, but I mean, exposure is actually, it is the backbone, and with exposure comes access to mentorship. Those of us who are in the industry, we would say is one of the barriers was lack of visibility. We didn't see many of our people in the mining industry, but now they are there. And I think because we are there, we the next step is mentorship and coaching. And slowly but surely, there are programs coming up that will mentor youth, people getting involved in the mining industry. I always touch on the topic of unconscious bias because, again, diversity and inclusion comes into play. But the one thing that's really holding us back a whole lot is this concept of unconscious bias that and you aren't even aware that you're carrying this bias that makes you think that A, I don't belong in the industry, but B, if I am in the industry, I'm going to keep the position I'm in. So there's a whole lot of play that goes into it. But I think we've been hammering the fact, both Linda and I, that the exposure that can be given to youth, to women, the sort of the unseen ones can at this point only be first, but not only. Linda was talking about corporate South Africa, and I'm talking about corporate Africa in general, and even those with the deeper pockets. And that support can be done if you collaborate with organizations such as ours.
I love the point that you're both making about exposure, and yes, from my own experience as well, and my own studies, people don't know their potential unless they can actually see the opportunity, and to see the opportunity, that's best experienced through individual role models, which you've both emphasized. Over here in the UK and in Europe, and to a certain extent in the US as well, however, mining isn't a first choice because it's not seen as, if I could say this in this way, but it's not seen as being very kind of fashionable. People prefer to go into investment banking or into Silicon Valley, for example, or even more negatively, it's seen as an unethical industry. Is that something which you experience in Africa, or is being more of a resource continent? Do people have any negative views of mining, and is that stopping the youth entering it? Or
the UK or global north, a mining profession is not attractive. Of course it's not, because most of the mining takes place in Africa, so they will rather go sit in Silicon Valley and all the lovely places and expect the end product of mining. So in other words, the entire value chain, as we've been talking throughout this podcast, the beginning part of what they need on the other side comes out of Africa. So in our introduction, Assheton, you said that you came to do a PhD study in Namibia on communities affected by mining, because you couldn't find a case study in where you're coming from. everything happens in this continent. So I think a lot of people are interested in joining the mining industry, work-wise, and it must just be made possible. So that, I think that is the dynamic. The reason, for me, is a very straightforward answer why these professions will not be seen as cool in that part of the world and seen as a need in this part of the world. Mining takes place in Africa. You need Africa for the mining.
That's a very fresh perspective, Zenzi. I never thought of it that way. And if I may add, or maybe just come in on a different angle, because you're looking international mining or in the West versus in Africa. If I purely look in Africa, or maybe even just South Africa broadly, I would say that another dimension, another angle that could negatively impact young people's participation in the mining sector, to your point, Assheton, is also the perceptions, but also the realities of mining. What we find, and that is across the spectrum, is that mines are typically in remote locations. Mining is, I know automated mines where they're obviously running 24/7 and they're working a range of shifts all throughout the night, on weekends, weekdays, etc. And that can be a little bit discouraging. And then there's obviously the ethical bit, like you said, the environmental bit. There's health and safety risks, which may naturally make a young person to want to veer into other sectors outside of mining. And then also when we look at young people, I think their mindset is different to the older generation, where millennials and Gen Zs are looking for work that is purposeful, it's impactful, and maybe the bias around the ethics and integrity and all of that in mining could be a hindrance, though I do think technology can play a huge role in that. Technology can play a huge role in that, because if we look at a range of technologies that are being implemented, it de-risks mining. We've seen it being de-risked with some of our clients. It makes the opportunity to work behind your desk a lot greater, and that might be more appealing to young people who maybe want impactful, purposeful work, but also work that's great it's better for the environment, and maybe also you can stay connected to your family, you can stay connected to your community and friends without necessarily having to be separated. So just the distance from urban areas to the mines, for me, I think that also could be a bit of a hindrance, because it comes with a lot of social and family, I don't want to call it distortions, but the setup is different, basically.
It comes back again to exposure, once, and I'm digressing, but it's to the point. Once I found out the importance of the mineral I'm mining to the economy of the country and the transformation it brings in just my immediate surrounding, I became quite passionate about the profession. And in telling my story, I always share that story with the youth. I mean, you mentioned something about the youth wants to do meaningful contribution to, I guess, their existence, etc. But that's when you start explaining to them. I was talking to, a high school students at the beginning of the school year now, and I said to them, geology is the backbone of civilization. And you start talking to them like that, they're like, wow, we never saw it that way. And then you start connecting geology and what comes out of the earth to technology. Now you speak their language. It comes down to exposure, but the way you do the exposure, I guess, will have to differ to the crowd you're speaking to, so, and that's one way of attracting the youth.
Exposure obviously is a theme that both of you brought up, but it's not only I hear about exposure to what are the opportunities of a career in mining, but also reminding society where the ingredients to their devices that they use come from. And it's that sort of exposure as well. And I used to work back in about 2004 to 2008. I worked with Walmart, the giant retailer, and we did the first fully traceable gold jewelry right up to the mine. And Walmart have this practice where they do what they call eat what you cook, which means they don't put anything on their shelves unless they've gone up the supply chain and see where it comes from. So we took all the executives from Walmart up to the gold mine in Nevada so they could actually see it for themselves. And so maybe what we need to do in terms of exposure is not just exposing what is opportunities in mining as a career, but also other parts of the value chain so everybody can have an appreciation.
we had a project called the Awima Jewelry Project that we ran in 2019 during COVID, and the idea was just to show the showcase the entire value chain and how women are involved. So and the crux of the project was we made a call for proposals for women to design a brooch, a piece of jewelry that speaks to the values and the mission, the values as well as a mission and vision of Awima, right? And so we said design a piece that speaks to what Awima represents in terms of, I think we used our logo, etc., etc. But there were 3 conditions. The designer had to be female. The jewelry, the metals used had to be mined by a female, as well as all the other intricacies. When you show that video from how the gold was mined in Mali by a small scale miner, the design was by a female Senegalese jewelry designer, and the end product was amazing, and that actually put it into perspective. From that, you start getting calls. How do I become a miner? From young ladies. And those who prefer the jewelry making, they then start asking, because there's a lady in Tanzania who went from being a small scale miner to today owning a jewelry line of her own. And that kind of story then inspires the next young person to want to follow the step that she followed, So yeah, comes down to exposure, but telling the involvement. I was recently in Germany where we were talking about what is the future of raw materials. And again, in Germany, the perspective is, we must, we have to introduce more technology. But when I asked the question, do you need more technology? Because the negative effects of extracting the metals going in there, everybody came to a standstill because that community isn't exposed to the entire value chain of where the end product comes from. So continuous conversation basically should be part of the exposure as well. Not just bringing them there, but continuously flooding them, because the young people of today they have it in their hands all the time. So continuously flooding them with information also is one way of attracting them to the industry.
And if I may add to that, Zenzi, I love that point you both raised, Assheton, around the end product that is a result of mining. I definitely think that there's work to be done there. And I'll admit myself, when I did an introduction to mining course, just learning a bit more around just the geology, the mining, metallurgical processes, I must admit I was quite fascinated when I realized the variety and the range of products that are purely dependent on mining. I think traditionally, broadly, we think of coal, we think of gold, we think of those products, but just if we're to just list that not only are your smartphones, our smartphones and input from mining products, even in healthcare, if we look at food storage, electrical vehicles, even cleaning products, hygiene products, I was quite amazed when we saw the list of end user products that we consume on a daily basis that depend on the output from mine. So definitely, I think that's important, because that also can be a draw card for people to realize that, listen here, we're not just focused on coal and gold and the traditional diamond, perhaps products, but also understand the spectrum and how they feed into very key and very important sectors in society.
When you start thinking about makeup and stuff like that, my daughter was asking the other day, how is makeup made? I took it down to the ground and I said, this is the the building block of the makeup that you wear, So yeah, there are many ways to bring to introduce the topic of exposure for young people to the industry.
And it seems to me we can learn something from the luxury industry, and we have them fall in love with the story of the provenance of the input materials into an EV battery, just as they fell in love with the story of the gold for their jewelry. If we can do that, then that'll be transformative. We're coming to the end of the podcast, but maybe I could ask you both to reflect on what are the changes that you think should happen. And by changes here, I don't mean the structural changes, infrastructure and so on. I mean the way that the industry views itself and how it conceptualizes mining in the mineral value chain. What needs to shift to meet the expectations of the next generation of miners?
I think we have to redefine success. I mean, just in a couple of minutes ago, we were talking about Linda's perspective, or rather what Linda has seen as is a perspective of why youth don't come in the mining industry, right? So, and then they call themselves the woke generation, will say, oh, mining is very, it's not good for the environment, etc., etc. So when and then the next question that they always, or a topic they always bring up is that, there's so much damage that the mining industry has done. I mean, my gosh, if I just think about wars that have taken place because of resources, minerals in a specific country, for example, when you start bringing in the topic of sustainability, but in a very fresher way, and start bringing in a transformative thinking process rooted in the urgent need to align the industry with the principles of sustainability and inclusivity and social responsibility, that is going to bring a fresh perspective into the industry. Currently, when you look at mining and you think of the extractive nature of it, I mean, that's why it's called extractive, because you literally dig a hole in the ground to get out what's in it. It's focused on profit and output, and it's always looking at, it's got a very negative effect to the environment. So we got to think differently to this extractive industry. I mean, and currently all the talk about climate change has literally shifted us to rethink the end use of the products we are mining. Now we know that mining is not just for luxury products. And I'm saying this because I worked for a diamond mine for most of my career. So you were asked the question, like, why are you damaging the environment because of for a luxury product? But when you start talking about the byproducts, I mean, I can talk about byproducts forever, but why we actually mine currently, and we bring in the topic of climate change, for example, it brings a different perspective. We gotta have to look at ESG not from just an investor's perspective, but ESG and from the community perspective. The community themselves are calling for ESG to be relooked in a very different way. We have to look at a very human-centered approach to the industry. It's not we have to shift from a transactional relationship to one that values its stakeholders and partners. At the end of the day, the money that the mining industry generate is supposed to benefit the people that are affected by the mining that comes out of it. So there's a lot to talk about, but I want to park it there for a while and hand over to Linda, and then maybe I can add later on.
So my comment around the mining sector, I'll make my comment a little bit biased to my background. If we look at the mining sector broadly, at least in South Africa, and I imagine the rest of the continent, established mining corporates are the heavy lifters in the mining sector. They're the largest beneficiaries of the mining sector. If I may take it even further, they are the custodians of the mining sector. So I do believe that if the change is going to happen, it must start right at the top with the corporates. And as corporates are seeking growth, seeking new opportunities, my thinking is that we need to move away from purely thinking of mining in terms of extractives, as Zenzi said, or extracting ore from under the ground. And from a growth perspective, we've seen the trend in other industries globally, but I don't think the trend is so predominant from a mining perspective in terms of corporate venturing. So corporate venturing in South Africa, I'm not sure what it looks like in Namibia. However, I do think there's opportunity for a lot more corporate venturing in South Africa and in the continent, where these larger corporates are basically seeing opportunity to invest stakes in up-and-coming entrepreneurs, startups, to do it directly or indirectly, to support the entrepreneurial ecosystem so that innovation and even mining technology improvements and efficiencies in their business can be sourced from startups that are working hand in hand with the bigger corporates. I do think if they can embrace and see that opportunity in the mining sector, it will allow more inclusivity across the board with young people and with youth. I mean, to give you an example, I'm a mentor at Savant Venture Capital Fund. Savant is a product of Sibanye-Stillwater, which is a big mining house, South African based. And essentially with the partnership, or at least the collaboration between the two entities, it's an opportunity for Savant to engage with startups through the Savant ecosystem, identify brilliant opportunities, and then plug that back into their business. So they incubate, they develop, and they scale entrepreneurs. And ultimately, it feeds back into their business because to the extent that the technology is groundbreaking, they plug it in. So I think from a corporate perspective, I would say there's a challenge to think differently and take ideas or steal ideas from other corporates in different sectors. And that would take leadership. It needs a certain type of leadership. It needs a certain type of approach and strategy, which I think can steer the mining sector in a direction that will be more inclusive, and it will allow a lot more scope and participation from various individuals across different spaces in the mining value chain.
Thank you. And that concludes today's podcast. I want to thank sincerely our speakers for joining us today. And to our audience, please check out the remaining of our TDI Sustainability series in partnership with the Mining Indaba of our podcast on suits and boots. Until next time, stay safe.